Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Korapati from Cambrian Lab. With me is my colleague Hiren Shah. And today's session is on digital workflows for procurement excellence. We will follow this agenda here. We're going to give a brief intro about our company and ourselves. We'll spend a few minutes on procurement versus procurement excellence from a perspective in terms of what needs to be done. We'll also talk briefly about what we are observing about procurement during a supply chain crisis and why it differs from normal day-to-day procurement processes. We will discuss a little about digital workflows for procurement excellence. We'll do a short demo. And then we'll open up the session for Q&A. The Q&A will be the last 15 minutes or so. From a continuity perspective, we figured, we will answer all the questions towards the end. The introductory presentation should take about 10 to 12 minutes, not more than that. We'll spend most of the time in the demo so that you can see how digital workflows actually help and promote procurement excellence. A little bit about Zoom webinars. It is very likely that you will have questions or you want to raise some points throughout the session. You can do that using the Zoom Q&A bar within your Zoom webinar at the bottom. I think the fifth icon says Q&A. Of course, you can also chat your question directly in, but Q&A would be ideal because we can see all the questions and be able to answer towards the end. And even better is these questions and answers can go along when we send all the materials after this session and the recording is available. Okay, so please type in your question in the Q&A bar in the Zoom webinar. Okay, so with that, I'll get started. We are a Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area based company with offices in different parts of the country. We primarily work with large manufacturing organizations that have complex, I would say, reasonably big supply chains. And, we do come with quite a bit of operational experience and technology. So our operational experience informed us on what some of the more effective ways to address some of the procurement challenges. Okay. So I and Hiren, a little bit about us. We have 20 plus year experience, both of us, in operations and operations technology. We come with the industry background in automotive, high tech, and others. And both of us went to the same college at Michigan Tech, so we've been friends for a long time. So if you think of procurement versus procurement excellence, one of the things that has become very evident, and we call it from 2020 to present, and we only nobody knows exactly when this supply chain crisis is going to end. But what is clear is that as procurement professionals, we have to change the mindset a little bit. Okay, and as a matter of fact, quite a bit. What used to be procurement in terms of the focus on cost and buyer-led, I would say, perspectives. Primarily, the focus was also a little bit on transaction. Hey, what can you do for me now? And the sourcing actually also happened quite extensively across the globe without consideration for lead times and resiliency and so on. Now, all of that has become a little bit of a problem right now because there is quite a bit of uncertainty in supply chain, which means, from a preference, from a focus perspective, you need to really look at, hey, can our suppliers provide the goods and services at a high performance, and do we have a resilient supply base? Which means, there are a number of things that you have to do really to build that out. In addition, I think the focus is also turning towards, how do we set up a long-term relationship with our supply base, not just one single supplier. So you have to start thinking in terms of supply base. How do we set up a long-term relationship, which is mutually beneficial, right? So we help you, you help us. So that's the mindset. I think that is very important right now as we go into the supply chain or in and out of the supply chain crisis. So if there's any big shift that is going to come out of this time period, it would be from a procurement, transitioning to a procurement excellence perspective. And if you think of, where is the path or what is the direction that we need to move towards from a procurement excellence perspective, a lot of it, people used to consider it as procure to pay. Hey, we buy, we pay you, you do what is expected of you, and we are good to go. That has to be different going forward. In terms of, you have to think like a strategic sourcing professional, right? In terms of, what is our supply base? Do we have the right suppliers? Do we need to increase the supplier capacity, increase and improve supplier capacity? So that's really, the middle, right? Strategic sourcing perspective. And then one step above that is, as a partner, suppliers also can use some help many times, especially if they are new. They need to know how to serve you best, which means you have to work cooperatively with them to improve their performance or the way they work with you, your company, which may include investments, training, and hand-holding, and even visiting, sitting in their factories and locations and so on, right? So as you go in that direction, the level of engagement and the trust is very high, but it does involve a bit of work, but the value is there, from both for the suppliers and importantly for you as an organization, and that usually presents itself as better supplier performance, better supplier quality, perhaps long-term lower costs, more stable supplies, etc. Right? From value for your organization is very high as if you go into this mindset, procurement excellence. And one of the things that we are seeing in the market today, we do work with across many industries, with several customers of different sizes. What we observe is today, you could, as a procurement professional, issue a PO and be done with your job. That is not sufficient anymore. Procurement's job is not done until the goods are received. It may be that for the time being, cost is not the most important consideration. As a matter of fact, I doubt if anybody has the power as a buyer over suppliers, at least in the current times. The other thing that is causing quite a bit of chaos, I wouldn't call it chaos, but at a minimum, quite a bit of change internally and externally, is the dynamic PO lifecycle. It used to be that once you issue a PO, it was all done. The contract is done, the delivery dates are, the quantities are agreed upon, the price is agreed upon, the schedules, the commitments, the consignments, etc., everything. None of that is true, especially in certain industries now. What that means is you issue a PO and you have to actively manage the life cycle of that PO. What is the price? Pricing may change, schedules may change, commitments may change. That means all your downstream production planning and operations will have to react to these changes. That's a very difficult situation right now that we've observed a lot of our customers are facing, which results in obviously chasing suppliers and working with them closely on a day-to-day basis, right? And when that is the need, what is really problematic for procurement teams is that they're really poor support for collaborating with suppliers. There's emails and phone calls. Nobody knows, where things are, and a lot of organizational stakeholders rely on your information. So as a result, they could be left in dark, right? And manufacturing teams don't know when, the products may come, right? And the other thing that we have seen is procurement teams are definitely overworked right now. It makes it very hard on a day-to-day basis. You can engage in overworking for weeks, but not months and years, which is the situation right now. So, and the reasons for this, to me, is it's the nature of right now the supply chain issues that we can't do much about it other than work through it. But what we can do is support procurement teams well. Today, that is not the case for a variety of reasons. There was over the years, I think there's been a lot of money and time spent on procurement automation with primary focus on cost, with an assumption that everything will work out just fine, right, as they agreed upon. That is not the case anymore. So it requires, there's a need for fairly significant coordination and handoffs today, that because of the changes that happen, that need to be supported. So none of this today is available for procurement teams, and actually even organizations as a cross-functional organization. It's not that just procurement team is responsible for suppliers, right? It's as a team, like in engineering and manufacturing and quality, everyone works with suppliers. So you need to be able to work as a team with suppliers. So that's what we observed, that there is no real systematic process that is supporting procurement teams. But there is I think the business case for procurement excellence is very straightforward, and you can really put those in these three buckets, right? A good supply chain, readiness of suppliers, and they are also able to do the work and do it at a very high level. Okay. So given that picture, what we have done is taken our workflow engine. So one of the things that over the years that we have, when we work with our customers, is we provide them with our workflow engine, which is designed for supply chains. It does come with several capabilities that you're seeing here, which makes it a very compelling solution for working with suppliers in a very collaborative fashion. And we'll see that demo today. We think it's for the current environment, this is probably a very effective and useful approach to work with your supply chain than traditional. There has been a lot of time and effort gone into setting up procurement automation tools and so on, which will work if everything is predictable. If nothing is predictable and you have the whole cross-functional teams that need to work with suppliers, it is a very hard proposition. So we're going to see how workflow-driven procurement excellence processes can actually step in and maybe provide a very effective solution for the current environment. And what we are going to do is look at some of the examples. We broke it down into several stages of procurement life cycle, from in the beginning, where do the needs for new suppliers come? How do you develop a supplier, and how do you work on a day-to-day basis and improve their performance, right? So these are all workflows that we've designed, that our customers sometimes design themselves with the workflow engine, and work with their supply chains. Okay, so we're going to look at some of these examples. One of the things that is very important, when you are working cross-functionally with suppliers, is to have an end-to-end process view. We'll see some of that. You will also see how it is important to be able to work with existing systems. I think the one is to be able to work with suppliers as people and internal teams as people. And the other thing is you also need to worry about where does all the information come from or get into, and how is it flowing. So that's another aspect that is important that we'll see. And so what I'll do is there are several ready-to-use digital workflows that we're going to look at. Keep in mind that you as an organization generally can design your own procurement excellence strategies and processes using this workflow engine. Okay, so with that, what I'll do is show you a demo of the solution, and we're not going to cover everything given the time frame and constraints that we have. However, we're going to see certain elements in the beginning, and what is our supply base? Where do the needs for new suppliers come from, and how do people cross-functionally engage on that process? We'll look at a couple of examples of how to evaluate supplier capability using RFIs and RFQs and RFPs. Right. So because before you decide upon a supplier, you need to understand, how capable that supplier is. We're not going to look at supplier readiness today, but we'll jump into, the day-to-day processes around purchasing. One of the things that we have seen is there's a whole wide variety of processes around purchasing, day-to-day purchasing that you need to be able to support. There is no one size fits all, and be able to support in an end-to-end fashion, right? So we'll look at some of the examples, and then we'll see a few scenarios around the supplier performance reporting that you can set up so that you can work with suppliers and show them where the improvement opportunities are. Okay, so with that, what I will do is bring the application to the foreground here. So as you can see, the application, the workflow engine here is set up to support a number of workflows across this procurement or supplier, what we call supplier lifecycle, right? From the beginning to, hey, we need a new supplier, to developing the supplier as before they are able to do business with you, right? They're ready to business with you. And on a day-to-day basis, you have a lot of internal and supplier collaboration activities that happen. How do you support that effectively and flexibly? And then, of course, you can continue on these workflows because we do work a lot in supplier quality and supplier improvement. So those things continue on throughout the life cycle, supplier life cycle, and it's an important part of supplier improvement, as a matter of fact. The other thing that we'll also briefly look at is, procurement is not an island, right? You need to be able to work with different parts of the organization, like engineering, where the needs of new supplier often come, or changes to supply chains often come from engineering. So those are, how does the cross-functional teams work from that realm into and engaging with procurement teams. Okay, so we'll look at all of that. So starting with our existing supply base. So we do keep track of suppliers. So let's understand how they're doing. And we have a number of suppliers here that we work with, right? Several of them are at different levels of capability. This is something that we evaluate based upon certain information that they provide, also based upon initial and continued performance, right? And then we also, as they continue to work, we look at, how is their performance, right? In terms of, several multiple facets. Look at that. So this is our supply base here. how they've been split up, and then the relationship status here, right? This is an important one for the supplier life cycle, which is to understand, from a potential to preferred, how do they make it through those different stages. Okay, and if you look at the individual suppliers, clearly, we have a number of manufacturers, different types of contract manufacturers, systems integrators, and they're all at different capability levels and performance. And supplier performance is pretty important because that's how, they are actually working with you. They could be very capable, but the need and how they perform for your requirement is more important than just the core capability of a supplier. And depending upon the category of suppliers, and we'll go one level deeper here. For example, if you look at Intel, it's one of our suppliers. They are providing different parts. Okay, there's only providing one part, but it's like one of the most important parts that you get from that supplier. So it is a strategic supplier because of the type of services components that they're providing. Okay. On the other hand, you may have Broadcom. If you look at it, they are also strategic, but they're also providing lots of parts across different programs, right? And some of them may be important, some of them may not be that important. So you have to really understand supplier capability and supplier performance against the needs of different programs. Okay, so we have the suppliers, and once there are other ways to understand supply base needs as well. But let's look at where the needs for suppliers come from, right? If you're really in engineering, you are designing new parts, new products. A lot of times there are new components that are added, and people select, hey, we need to really work with Intel on this specific component. Okay, we've selected Intel. Now it's up to procurement to pick that up and bring the manufacturer in and make them as a supplier. They could be an existing manufacturer, but you still need to be able to come to an agreement on how they're going to be providing this part, right, for the need that you have. So everything then, their engineering teams can start off this workflow. A lot of workflows, people design it themselves. All workflows are very cross-functional, which means there are different roles within the organization here that are part of this workflow, and there are actual members of the organization that play that role. For example, you can see component engineering plays component purchasing, quality engineering is supplier quality, and so on. So, and then it has been organized as there is once the component engineering requests that the new manufacturer and their component needs to be added as part of the new build, the workload takes over. It can be initiated by systems or individual people, and people are coming in and as workflow actors and doing the work or reviews, etc. So if you look at this example here, what we have here is the component. Once the component engineering reviews it, it is sent out to class 1 approval, so which only requires 2 types, like purchasing and regulatory approvals, or class 2 approval, which includes actually 4 of them. They can all happen simultaneously, right? So test engineering, supplier quality, all of them have to sign off on this manufacturer plus manufacturing component, right? So people can look at this data sheet. Obviously, there's a lot of information. And if all the pricing, all of that is acceptable, it goes into the approvals are finished, and it goes into a supply agreement, right? So supply agreement is, as a matter of fact, it could be another sub-process here. So I'll show you a good example where the supplier agreement comes out of as a contract process, and it will be created here, right, as a connected one. So here we are agreeing this is going to be an outline agreement, and part of the contract is again, everything is workflow based. So all the cross-functional teams that are responsible for this, for different roles, legal, supplier, VP of supply chain, come together and actually set up this outline agreement for this part. Right. So what started off as a component engineering, actually led to a supplier. Because it is an existing supplier, we're going directly into the outline agreements with that supplier. Right. So that's how one process kicks off another one, and then it continue on. So that starts off as an engineering. On the other hand, sometimes you might just say, hey, we just need a manufacturer. It is not with respect to a lot of capital equipment and services. People just request new suppliers to be added. In which case, people start off as the requester. Anybody in the organization can request it, depending upon the need. And we are using a slightly different workflow, which is very different in terms of what it does. Here, people are looking at, because it's a new supplier, you do a little bit of supplier risk analysis, purchasing review, finance approves it. There's a supply planning aspect of it. And we are also setting up a supplier contract. As you can see, the supplier contract here is a slightly different, same thing, but it is serving the need of a new supplier, right? So the processes these workflows can be started and continue on until the work is actually done, right? So new supplier, component, existing suppliers, what the agreements are, and how the cross-functional team comes together and does this work together, okay? The other big aspect of it is, if you look at, as we are doing this supplier contract setup, once it is done, once the final approval for the supplier is done, you also need to create the vendor in your various systems, right? Most common, of course, is your ERP system. Here, in this case, it automatically, after all of this work is done by different teams, it automatically sets up this vendor in SAP and communicates everyone, hey, this vendor, this number has been set up, and you can now do business with that supplier. Because until that vendor is set up in all these systems and you have ability to receive goods, services, and pay, it is not done, right? So from a procurement perspective. So this is the initial stages of bringing in suppliers. As part of that, you may actually, one of the things that you do before you're getting suppliers is, or doing business with existing suppliers, you might be conducting some RFPs, just to request some information. We always, most of our customers do multi-sourced RFPs. So there's always more than one supplier. It could be an existing supplier or a new supplier. And this is a fairly easy to use workflow where the RFP independently sends out to one for Intel, another one for NVIDIA. They both work in their own workflows, both your suppliers. It could be just by email, or you can also set them into their the portal. I'll just show that to you in a short while, where they can come in and answer the questions and provide you the required information. Okay, so you're asking for certain questions. The questions when they answer, suppliers answer, it is a very nice, easy to use. They just log in one page. It almost looks like you're answering a survey. Okay, and once it is done, if you look at this workflow, RFP response, supplier responds it, review the response. You want to go back and forth with suppliers, you can do that. There's like chat with existing suppliers. Once that is done, approve the supplier response, and the information makes it back into your RFP. Once all of that process is done, you can, rate supplier responses, right? Who is overall. Again, this is based a little bit on a scoring system, right? Which takes both the types of response that you're looking for, right? What are the different weights of these responses that you got from the suppliers, and gives it a normalized, based on 0 to 100 score, right? So in this case, Intel and NIFCO are rated accordingly. So, and then once it is done, you're going to either select a supplier. In many cases, some of our customers actually do multi-sourcing, so they give allocation, if they're close enough, depending upon how you do it, right? So if you look at some examples of all of this leading to multiple suppliers providing the same component, I'll show you a part here so that if you look at these cameras and we have the camera lens, this actually is given out to 3 suppliers, and the allocation is 70-70, and all of them can provide it as a production component, right? So it depends upon, from a resiliency perspective, you need to have many customers today are taking the strategy of multi-sourcing, just so that, you have that capacity in case, from a risk management perspective. Okay, so this is the initial stages. So part of that, when you're working initially with suppliers, you also can use some internal workflows to assess supplier capability assessment, right? So for example, you want to understand what is capability of Broadcom for processors, right? Based upon the answers they have, what internal teams feel. Again, this assessment weight and facets you can determine, or you can set up. And one of our recommendations for most customers is that, there is no one size fits all. I mean, what do you need to do for assessment for a production part is very different from how you should assess a services oriented supplier. If you're buying, capital equipment, things like that, right? So you need to use particular assessment weights and weight metrics for different needs. And then, based on that, it gives a supplier capability score for that need. Okay, so this is for processors. It is not for Broadcom. It is Broadcom for processors. What is their score? What is their capability? So that's a better way to understand than just flat out giving scores for suppliers, because it's fairly meaningless to, for most needs, to give a score to a supplier, because it is for a specific need that you need to think about. Okay, so once it's done, so we are past the initial stages of selection. One of the things that is very common, so we'll look at now the purchasing processes come into play. So we've seen, obviously purchase requisitions, people have been doing it for ages now, right? So you have, buying is a fairly universal process within organizations. You have procure to pay software, you have catalogs. What we have seen, however, is, there is no, one way of buying things. There is always different ways of buying different items. For example, if you're doing generic purchases, let's say you're buying zFlow software, right? So you want requested, 35,000 budget. The PR value is also 25,000. So a lot of times, if you look at this workflow, it's a fairly simple one, which is you have, you need to have budget, obviously, which means there is a WBS element or internal orders to set up budget. You check a budget. If it is over some quantity, you want to get your VP approved. If it is over a certain quantity, president approved. You may select a supplier, or you might just decide to give it to a new supplier onboarding. You issue a PO and you're done, right? And then the invoicing, etc., that will happen against this issued PO. Right? So this is a very simple purchase requisition process. Again, there are lots of members. We're saying, if purchasing one if it is greater than 1,000, and then the workflow is designed like this. Again, most of our customers, they design the workflow themselves based upon their internal needs. Okay, so this is a simple thing. On the other hand, you may have a capital equipment purchase requisition. If somebody is buying a paint shop in the manufacturing factory, that is a much more significant purchase, which requires a very different set of activities, right? Still budget, but there's a plant manager involved, there's president, there's actually an assigned buyer, there is an RFQ process, there is a PO issued after that, there is asset commissioning, and then you have to create equipment master data, and then you need to do asset accounting setup. Very different from what we've just seen, the original one. So when we looked at all of this, again, same thing, right? Different roles, different people, depending upon the plant that you may be, actually the people vary, and the capital equipment purchase process is quite different, right? So if you are thinking in terms of internal purchasing processes, you need to start thinking in terms of, hey, what is the need and how should we design it so that it serves the need of that specific type of purchase, but also does an beginning to end type of job. And in all these cases, just so that to understand, we connect to different external systems. Our most popular software that we normally connect to from a supply chain procurement perspective is SAP. It tends to be both the financial thing. So if you look at and seamlessly connect it as part of workflows using these APIs, creating vendors and creating materials, creating purchase recs, creating purchase orders, and so on, right? So you need to be able to work very seamlessly with this thing, and the workflows actually allow you to do that. And the fact that it's connected, you don't need to think about, hey, how do we fit in within an organization, both from a people perspective as well as systems perspective. So now that the purchase requisition is issued, part of purchase requisition is more often than not, there is a PO involved. And this is where I think we are seeing one of a very, very dramatically different process now than it was maybe even a year ago. Purchase orders in the old times used to be that you issue a purchase order, you would give a quantity, pricing agreements, and delivery dates, and so on, and you're done, right? You would then expect suppliers to provide the required quantity, the required goods at the required price at the required time. That is not the case anymore, right? One of the things that we've seen is, even if you agree and publish the schedule, there's no guarantee that this is how they're going to do it anymore. What suppliers are going to come back is, and that's where we've set up this workflow so that suppliers can participate in POs. The moment the PO is released, they actually get it. And you look at it, if you look at this workflow, it is the supplier is invited, and the supplier has an opportunity to respond to this PO. Okay, so I'm going to now log in actually as a supplier. So one thing that when I was showing you, when we have these suppliers, so let's pick Intel. We've also added Intel users into the system. So that means they can participate in any workflows you add them or give access to. So we've added Intel here. These are the people. A number of suppliers actually have users, so they can actually participate in these workflows by logging in. And they have their own area within the workflow engine. So if you look at it, it says I kind of differentiated the internal view in white, and then the dark border here says this is a supplier. Suppliers can come to this URL, and they get an invitation. They can join in. In this case, I've already joined this session as an Intel supplier administrator, supplier representative. So I'm going to log in. So suppliers, when they come in, they have their own launchpad. They have a list of things in which, these are all different workflows in which they can participate. And there are, we'll look at some other examples of how they get the performance information and so on. So we are at the PO right here. The moment the PO is released, it automatically invites the supplier, adds the supplier to the PO workflow, and sends them a notification. Usually they can see that that they have some work to do here with the activities. Okay, so when they come in and open, they have two options here. It's very, very simple for suppliers to do it. Either they can confirm this PO or they can change this PO. If I pick the change this PO, they actually are allowed to make changes to any of the schedule dates. Of course, they can add their own commitments to it, against the schedule lines. As you can see, there's, the commit dates are different, the quantities are different, and it can actually come back. If you look at this workflow here, when they submit these changes, it actually comes back to the internal buyer saying, hey, how do you want to do it? Do you want to approve those changes that the supplier submitted? If you do agree, if you don't agree, it can go back to suppliers. At that point, you decide what to do it. But if you do agree, you can process the PO changes, because any changes to POs has significant downstream effects, from a purchase MRP runs, planning perspective, and preparation for receiving, and do you need to make any backup plans, things like that, right? So you need to process a lot of changes. Some of them are automated systems, and some of them could be completely manual process. You have to react, reaction processes, if we want to call it like that. And and then you continue on from a workflow perspective, right? You keep waiting for the goods receipt. One of the things that when we work with supplier customers that have suppliers that are using these workflows, they also want to, definitely get a view of, what is the current GR status, right? So that everyone knows, which have been received, which have been, how the process is coming along. Okay, everything is up for change these days. That is one big issue that we have seen, which creates enormous amount of load on procurement teams. When we say procurement teams are overworked, it's partly because of this one process, PO lifecycle, the changes in PO life cycles. Okay, so then obviously we are continuing with the day-to-day work. So as you're continuing with your day-to-day work, suppliers are working with you. You want to be able to provide some performance information to them, right? So we have a performance assessment workflow that actually allows your internal teams to rate suppliers' performance. Whether a supplier is doing a good job or not is not just numerical quantitative values. It's also how people think of what that value, how they're doing, right? So it's a combination of that. You can give them these scorecards, assessment reports, say, this is how, based upon your work with us, you're doing on different aspects. Obviously, places where there is room for improvement, you can you look at this, you share this with suppliers and then set up some improvement programs and so that they can work on them collaboratively with you, right? And those improvement programs can be any of these. People use different techniques depending upon your corporate, QMS policies. Sometimes they're called A3 reports, sometimes they're 8D problem-solving process, right? It can have this own workflow. So this is where, in terms of when we say cross-functionally, it goes above and beyond, procurement teams, right? So these improvement programs require, different people coming in, quality, supplier representatives, team leads, and so on, right? So this could be coming from manufacturing. The team lead could be a manufacturing person. So these are where, everything becomes a little bit more across the organization as opposed to single point of contact with suppliers. Even here, in this case, Intel is involved, but a lot of other people are also getting involved, working with Intel to improve their performance. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to also show a few things. Suppliers also you can make a number of workflows accessible. Accessible to suppliers so that they can participate, like things like non-conformance reports, supplier corrective actions, any performance, you can even publish directly to them so that they can understand how they're doing, previous periods, and what the different elements of that performance score. There are many things that people do on how they calculate performance. So it's something that they should know, how they're doing, right? This is more quantitative in its approach compared to the supplier performance assessment that you've seen here. But the closer it is for suppliers to be able to work with your organization, not just procurement team, not just buyers, not just sourcing leads, but across the organization, it is that much more easier for suppliers to be able to do a good job for your organization. So we find this workflow-based approach significantly better than just, obviously, if you're just working by email or phone, it works to a certain extent, but it is not neither systematic nor the whole organization can work with your supply chain partners. On the other hand, a workflow-based approach that goes from beginning to end, has the advantage that your whole organization can actually work with your supply chain collaboratively. Okay, so with that, we have 10 minutes for Q&A. I think I have. There's a question on, does the system allow for rating suppliers separately across multiple industries? For example, the supplier may provide PPE and office supplies during the pandemic. They may be more viable for PPE purchasing than outside of the pandemic. Should the metric show the combined information of medical and office supply availability, or those two graphs be different? We generally prefer commodity-based performance. Of course, you can, depending upon a supplier and how you want to rate them, you can combine those, but it is more meaningful, like we were talking about, to measure supplier capability as well as performance against a need. Right, so we looked at this supplier capability here. Here it is for a processor. This rating is not for Broadcom across the board. It is for that processor commodity. So similarly, if you're doing PPE and office supplies, it is a better strategy to do capability assessments or performance for that commodity, because most purchasing is done by commodity. Now, as a supplier, they may still be providing both of them, And if you're responsible for the supplier, you really need to provide them with a more consolidated score, but we still think it needs to be done by that performance, a more differentiated scoring. So even here, for example, let's assume that Model X here is PPE and Model Y is office supplies, right? You're still providing them with, against that specific program, right? Although it goes as one single assessment score to the supplier. We believe that without that level of understanding, it becomes very hard to really fine-tune where suppliers should focus on from an improvement perspective. Okay. Is there a dashboard view that lists all active workflows and the status, which step they are, and who's holding up a workflow? Yes. So the other thing that we did not go in depth here is obviously this is a personal dashboard for specific users, the home, but you also can, for example, say, hey, where are all my workflows here? This is a consolidated view of all the different workflows where they are at. Okay, and you can create lots of nice dashboards out of this, and each. So that's one way to understand. Each of these workflow has its own search system. So for example, if I look at all the new supplier requests, these are currently in flow right now, right? There is another question in terms, is there a method for disqualifying duplicate workflows where multiple people may have created a workflow for the same project? Yes, you can cancel workflows very easily. So if I open this and stop the workflow, it is done. And you can stop it and pretty much remove the workflow. You can also delete workflows. So generally people stop it or cancel the workflow completely. Yep. There's one more question. Yeah. Okay. So the other thing that we normally get a lot is, how does it interoperate with your ERP systems, and where do we set it up? So depending upon the need, obviously, especially if you want engagement with suppliers, you can set it up in a manner so that they have a very limited view. We of course we are exposing a lot of different things to the supplier, but many suppliers may just need to respond to certain POs and maybe forecasts and RFQ responses. So you can configure it so that only a few workflows are accessible to specific suppliers, and they can participate. Some of them they can start workflows too. A good example here is if you are, for example, let me take this supplier initiated PPAP. So when I create supplier initiated PPAPs here, it actually allows suppliers to create new ones. Okay, so that's one way you can allow suppliers to initiate certain things. On the other hand, if you look at PPAPs that are started by internally organization, even this is set up to create new. But if I look at purchase orders, there is no new here because they cannot do anything. They cannot create some purchase orders. So that's how you can configure it. I think there is another question around the dashboard view, etc. Which step, who is holding up the workflow? Yes, so we do have a very nice, for each of these individual workflows, you can actually get a timeline. When are things happening? Okay. When did actually the specific workflow, when did that happen? It's very useful. At any given time, you can open a workflow and understand how much of it has been completed. Okay, so here in this case, this is a very powerful feature a lot of customers use, is something called sub workflows. So within this workflow, the supplier contract setup is a sub workflow that is currently going on. So as a matter of fact, this workflow waits until this sub workflow is finished and then it moves on. So you can design such fairly useful, effective, and intricate workflows using the system. The other thing is, let's say you've have had the system for a while and you want to understand where the bottleneck activities are. Each of these templates, these workflows are designed as templates, which you as an organization, your team can design them. Most of our customers, they design everything themselves. We'll show them as initially, but by and large, it's done by themselves, this thing, right? So once it is done, you can also actually understand, if you have enough of them, what the process cycle times are, how are individual activities taking. For example, here, obviously, we've been doing demos where everything is done in seconds, but you can see, who is taking long, right? If you look at this RFQ process, on an average, it's taken 84 days, right? 43 days average. Of course, much better metrics are available if it's in a real world environment. But no, by looking at this, you can then focus on where the improvement opportunities are, right? Now, what should you focus? If you're trying to reduce cycle time, you really need to know where the issues are. Okay. I know we are in the last 2 minutes. What we also wanted to highlight here is, as you have seen all of these capabilities, one of the things most of our customers have done before they became our customers is they either test drove the workflow engine or they actually conducted free pilots. It's a free pilot is a little bit more involved than a test drive, because you can design your own processes, procurement processes, the way they have set up in your organization, or the way you would like to improve them, and test it out yourself. It's a very good indication of, if it works out well, it will definitely work for your whole organization and the supply chain, right? So you can take that risk factor out by doing free pilots. If you are interested, please let us know, and we would be more than happy to support any of these, free pilots or test drives, etc. We have several that are currently running. Everyone designed their own workflows, the way they work, whether it is new suppliers or supplier performance reporting or supplier business reviews. All of them are currently being piloted. Okay, any more questions? Let me see. Yeah, I think we have answered most of them. Before we leave, I think they're almost at the top of the hour. What we will do after this session is, once the recording is available, we will distribute the materials, including the presentation and the video. So you can, either review it again or share it with your other colleagues within the organization. And our contact information will be there in that email. If you are interested to learn more or would like to test drive or conduct a free pilot, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to support. Other than that, I want to take the time to thank you for joining this session. I know it's a very busy time of the year. you took 1 hour out of your very busy schedule to join us, and I hope you found it of value. Thanks, everyone. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or need information. And thank you. Have a great day.